Tonight, it's the Chris Michaels Show. It's going to be interview night. Exciting stuff. Greg Boulden will be joining me. And as you know, after 2.5 decades, we still have questions about what occurred on 9/11. And as you know, we cannot ever trust the mainstream media to answer our questions because more than likely they are complicit in some kind of narrative that they want to make sure that the public at large agrees with. Tonight, I will be with Richard Gage, AIA. He is from the San Francisco Bay Area. He's an architect, member of the American Institute of Architects, and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He now leads the charge for a new World Trade Center investigation, along with his courageous wife, Gail, at richardgage911.org. Mr. Gage became interested in researching the destruction of the World Trade Center high-rises after hearing the startling conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio in 2006, which launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11. The organization he founded, AE 911 Truth, now numbers more than 3,600 architects and engineers, demanding a new investigation into the explosive destruction of all three World Trade Center high-rise buildings on 9/11. He's also joined with Kamal Obeid, and he is a structural engineer and civil engineer with more than 40 years of professional experience, where he focuses on designing and retrofitting structures. He's been involved in the 9/11 Truth movement as a signatory and an expert, where he analyzed, and still does, the collapses of the World Trade Center buildings, specifically World Trade Center 7. So please welcome Greg, welcome Richard, and welcome Kamal. How are you?
Hi, everybody. Great to see you guys. Thanks, Chris and Greg, for having us on.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be joined by you, gentlemen. I'm looking forward to the conversation this evening.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we just passed 9/11, didn't we? And to give you a little bit of my background, I knew September 11th at 4:30 p.m. that this whole thing didn't smell right. I remember watching the news, and I'm going, I don't believe this at all. And a lot of people got mad at me for saying that. They're like, can't you give it a break for one day? And I said, no, I can't, just because none of this adds up. And you've got passports that fly out of the window, and then they're collected by the FBI. And then people said, this is ridiculous. And then the FBI said, well, it's not really what you think. And we may have been mistaken. And I am tickled pink to have both of you here to dispel some of these myths. Greg, when did you start to realize that the story wasn't exactly what we were being told?
So I kind of have a different, story than Chris. I actually have a friend who was killed in the towers. He worked for Kenner Fitzgerald. And for many years, people would send me things like Loose Change, the documentary, and people questioning, 9/11 for truth. And I would get pretty angry about the whole thing because it seemed like the sacred day where a friend had died. And it wasn't really until several years had gone by where people asked me about World Trade Center 7. And I watched the footage and I saw this thing come down at a free fall speed. And I started connecting the dots going, you know what? Just because this personally touched me and so many other people in our hearts, and it's such an emotional thing, that maybe I'm actually doing a disservice by not asking questions for my friend's death. And so that actually got me thinking that I need to start looking at the evidence. I can't just go, well, that's exactly how it happened. I admittedly don't have time for like, oh, these are remote controlled planes and stuff. I'm not really down that whole side, but I definitely now have questioned after seeing other steel buildings catch on fire in the world since September 11th, not collapse. I certainly have started the question whether or not we saw thermite, whether or not we are seeing something where there was an individual or individuals that brought down the building with explosives. So I've been on that kind of for the last 15 years, thinking in terms of that. So that's why I'm really interested, because I want answers for Dan Gallagher, my friend, his family. I want answers for all the other people, the over 3,000 people that lost their lives that day. They deserve it, and I think we all need to demand a better report. So I'm very interested, Mr. Gage and Mr. Obeid, tonight to hear what they have to say. So thank you both, gentlemen, for being here to help honor those that we've lost.
Thank you, Greg.
So I think the simplest way to get involved in your research is probably World Trade Center 7. How is it that a 47-story building could possibly free fall the way it did?
It's easy. You just lie to the American people and then duck and cover. But they are really ducking and covering, aren't they, Kamal? And Kamal and I are here to share with you how that happened. If you want to put up this screen.
Absolutely.
We'll first of all show people what we're talking about, because most people don't know anything about World Trade Center 7, really. Yeah. I mean, architects and engineers. Kamal and I have gone to trade shows in the industry for the last couple of decades almost, and we show them at our evidence booth Building 7 coming down, and they go, "Oh, that's a controlled demolition." And we go, "Well, yeah, do you know when that happened?" And they don't know. And we tell them, "Oh, that happened on 9/11. They go, "What? That's not one of the Twin Towers." No, but it's easily one of the tallest buildings, the tallest building in most of our states. It was about a football field away from the North Tower. And when the North Tower went down, there was some damage to Building 7. And but NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people, they said, that's not part of the problem. The damage to this building, well, it did not bring the building down. It was the fires that brought this building down. Well, let's look at the building collapse. Here you can see on the east side, the left side on the top, the east penthouse coming down, and in an isolated event. And 6 seconds later, this happens. Now people understand why you're asking the question, guys, because that does not happen to buildings that are on fire, as we'll see. But this is exactly what NIST told us happened here.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Fires. So we got to look at those fires, right? These are the worst fires that we have any evidence of in this building. They're few, they're small, and they're scattered.
It's a conflagration. Goodness. I said it's a conflagration. Goodness.
Well, yeah. Well, look at their computer simulation of the fires in their computer model, leading us to believe that up to the time of the collapse, you have this incredible fire lasting for hours on this floor. But the photographs show that the fires were burned out over an hour before this building came down. Well, we've never lost a steel frame fire protected structure ever due to fires. And we have many, dozens and dozens of examples, not before nor after 9/11 have we ever lost one. So we have to ask ourselves, what does this really look like? And Kamal can tell you what's, yeah, like the old hotels in Las Vegas, right? Yeah. Kamal, what's happening here in this building that it looks so similar to a controlled demolition on the left?
Yeah, well this is an amazing story. It's an amazing fabricated story that the building, when you look at the NIST report, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who were tasked by our government to do the investigation of the building, they came up with a report that's full of flaws and just full of mistakes. And whenever you question them about any of the issues in their report, they completely deflect and tell you tell you, go back, read the 10,000 pages of our report before you come and ask us any questions.
They actually did say that.
Right. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, this is a classic controlled demolition.
And so we look at the features of that. Go ahead, Kamal.
Yeah, I must say it's a job well done by whoever, whether it's the Twin Towers or the Building 7. They did an excellent job at bringing it down in its footprint so that it doesn't really fall on the side or, just doesn't cause any more damage beyond the area that within its footprint.
And Kamal, can I ask you a question just to clarify before you
Absolutely.
get into this? So when buildings are constructed, you guys are the structural engineers and the architects. Is it ever possible that a building would not fall straight down, or are they built no matter what if they fail to go straight down? What is the difference between controlled demolition and what you would see as a structural collapse? Can you explain that to listeners as you go through this so we can really detail it for them?
Well, there's many facets to structural collapse. You could have partial collapse, which is if anything could have happened within this building, we would have had a partial collapse. So you have some, let's say, one floor dropping or walls falling apart, but nothing of that would warrant a beautiful picture like the one that they came up with. Actually, it's a very sad picture of how the building comes down, free falls close to free fall speed straight into its footprint. There is no way you can get a building to do that without actually simultaneously taking out several columns or all columns along several floors. In this case, for the study that we had conducted, Richard and architects and engineers and I Love the Truth, the study that we engaged the University of Alaska to do a study, they determined that you need 8 floors to be removed, all columns simultaneously, in order to mimic exactly how this building came down.
Yeah. So we have to ask ourselves, what are the features of controlled demolition? And does Building 7 have any of those features? Well, let's begin with feature number 1. Is there a sudden onset of the destruction? Here's Dan Rather narrating this collapse that evening.
What you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building. It's amazing.
Oops.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
What was that, Dan? Deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down? This is his words, of course, and he's using his intuition, as we all should. It looks like the old hotels in Las Vegas. We have a frame of reference for such a destruction. Unfortunately, Dan never repeated these words after 9/11. In fact, with only 2 exceptions, we've never seen Building 7 come down on mainstream television. I'm one of 90,000 members of the American Institute of Architects. I didn't get one bulletin on this, the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history after the Twin Towers. Kamal, did you guys get any word about this? 2001,
Well,
2007?
A few days after the event, the Structural Engineers Association started putting together, opinion presentations by various structural engineers about theories of how the building came down. None of them seemed to make any sense, but it was just too soon. Anyway, so we're talking about Building 7, though, so maybe we should. There was no discussion about Building 7 until much, much later.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So does it have feature number 2, a straight down symmetrical progression in the building's footprint? Well, let's look from West Street. Yeah, pretty straight down, pretty symmetrical. How do you do that is the question that you asked Kamal. And the answer pretty much is you have to take out all the core columns within a fraction of a second of each other, followed about a second later by the perimeter columns. And then you have to repeat that on each floor for which this building is in free fall. Now,
so there must have been a massive amount of preparation for something like this.
Sure. Yeah, you have to have access to the building. The building was only half occupied, according to the evacuation records produced by NIST. So you certainly need access to these columns to place explosives. It would take a team of dozens of people, months to put together.
Is there examples that maybe we could talk about where when they've been trying to plan controlled demolition, some of these core columns were faulty? The explosives did not go off. And then what would we expect to see if you don't have each floor covered, you don't have core columns? What would be something that the average citizen would notice that would be different than what we saw with World Trade Center 7?
Let me try to answer that. In fact, Professor Leroy Holsey at University of Alaska did a very thorough study on this building. And we tried all kinds of different scenarios of which NIST had come up with. In other words, you fail one column, and that's going to it's going to suck down the whole building. That's the whole theory, is that you have one column that actually failed, column number 79, that actually dragged down the entire building in a cascading event. It's a fantastic theory. But anyway, so the point is that he did several, Professor Leroy Holsey did several studies where he took out some column here, a column there, and to see what happens to the building. And in many cases, the building would shift to the side and stop before it started collapsing. Other instances, one floor collapses, but the building's still standing. That kind of stuff. So you wouldn't have a collapse like this unless you take out the entire set of columns. But to answer your question, if you're saying if there was some faulty explosives within the buildings, I would think you'd still have. I mean, depending on how many are faulty, but if you've got 1% faulty, you'd still have some major collapse, but it may not collapse exactly the way they planned it.
Something like this, huh?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, just it's.
Yeah, you don't. The explosives don't go off. Somebody has to go back into that building and fix it, right?
Yeah, I'm so glad you have this video because that's in my mind. That's what I wanted to kind of clarify for people too. Again, I told you I'm going to try to get the questions the average person's thinking, and this is perfect to see. Wow, the building stays so far intact on where there's not a controlled demolition. That's amazing.
And buildings that are damaged on one side fall to that side. For instance, they say this huge amount of fire caused these long span beams here to push this girder off of its seat on this column 79, and floor 13 then fell on 12, and so on for 9 floors. This is their official collapse theory in a nutshell. And they depend on these fires to be burning at that time because this is a thermal expansion collapse theory, cause that the beams are expanding during the fire to push this girder off of its seat, et cetera, et cetera. But those fires, as you can see in the photographs, are burnt out over an hour before the building even falls. So NIST is they're suffering quite dramatically, and buildings that are damaged on one side like that, if they were going to collapse, would fall over to the path of least resistance. So we would have expected that type of collapse. Come on.
Now, if I remember correctly, and I may not, so feel free to correct the narrative of what the NIST put out there. They said something about jet fuel was burning hotter than a regular fire, and that's what spilled out and hit this building and ignited it.
No, that's not what they say, actually.
They didn't say that. Okay. Because I had heard that said before and somebody explaining as to why this
I have never heard that one.
Fire.
What NIST says is that this building was hit by some of the beams that were ejected, which we hope to get today, out of the North Tower, hitting this building and lighting fires in the building.
Okay, so my question then is this. If these are just regular fires, and I think this kind of goes something that you talk about occasionally from what I understand, this would change what firefighters actually have to do with buildings if a regular fire can all of a sudden take out these steel structures that are supposed to be fire retardant. Am I incorrect in assuming that this kind of rewrites fire code if this is possible?
It should have. It should have. If what NIST was saying was true, then the firefighters should not be going into these buildings, which they routinely do to put out fires that are much worse than this. And they've never had one come down on top of them before, or on top of the people who are told to stay in place, defend in place while the firefighters are going up to fight the fires. They don't want to have to fight the people coming down the stairs. So they tell them to stay in place. Well, now, if buildings can come down at free fall acceleration because of a few small scattered fires, that should rewrite the codes. Not only those codes, but Kamal, how about the structural codes that we used to build buildings with?
Well, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, the only push to rewrite codes had been relating to what's called progressive collapse. In other words, if you take out an element of the building, how could you have the entire building come down? So these codes are being presented now, revisions to the code for preventing progressive collapse. But I mean, the whole concept is flawed to begin with, because it just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen like that, especially with modern structural steel frame buildings. Modern structural steel frame buildings are beams and columns are welded together so well that the columns and beams can actually bend and twist without actually failing, and that's how they're designed. Even if they get overheated or they start deflecting as a result of getting hot and sagging and that kind of thing, still they should not fail like that.
Yeah. And so we have to look at feature number 4. How fast does this building come down? Well, physics teachers like David Chandler have analyzed the structure and show that it came down at free fall acceleration. Well, what does that mean? That's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky, gaining velocity every second, the definition of acceleration. Well, this building, the bowling ball, had no structure underneath it, right? It's falling at free fall. This building had 40,000 tons of structural steel. That's designed, isn't it, Kamal, to keep this building from going anywhere? What's the safety factor in these buildings?
Oh, yeah. I mean, factor for buildings like this, you're designing them for hurricane force winds. And hurricane force winds are caused, I mean, you look at the forces per square foot on the building, it may not be, let's say, 100 pounds per square foot or whatever it is. But when you apply it over the entire building, that's huge. Those forces, you're designing the building to 3 times the actual strength, at least. So typically that's how you have a good factor of safety there.
And so the building can't do this. Now, NIST denied that it fell at free fall for years until they were caught by members of AE 911 Truth saying, hey, this is easily measurable. It came down to free fall. You got to correct this. And they did. They corrected it. They produced in their final report, which came out 7 years later, after 2001. And in 2008, they admitted that it came down at free fall for at least a third of its 7-second fall. But they don't acknowledge the implications of that, which are that every one of these columns gave way. Not one of them gave any resistance during that period of free fall.
Why would
Where'd they go?
Why would they not consider this?
Well, one could speculate that they had a job to do, which was to cover up the truth that these buildings were explosively demolished, which we will show proof of. And so they are covering it up. Do you have another answer to that question? Come on.
Well, I mean, typically, from what I've seen, engineers sometimes, even though they're required to conform to a higher code of ethics, tend to be more like lawyers, where you've got to protect your client, you got to deliver a story that makes more sense to your client. Your client says, you limit your scope to this kind of. You look at this thing without thinking. Explosives is not an issue. Controlled demolition is not an issue. We don't want you to even look at that. Try to explain the collapse of the building by furniture fires. So that's what they go to work having to do when they come up with a theory, and they call it a very elegant theory. If you look at the quote from Sunder.
If you're not allowed to ask certain questions, then you'll never find evidence.
Yeah, very elegant theory. But the interesting thing about that is that when you look at the model that they came up with, the actual failure model of the building, so they did all these little events that happen in the building where they say one column failed here, one beam failed here, and actually the building crumples. But their model, it crumples up like a beer can. So maybe Richard, you have those slides.
Yeah, we'll show that when we get to Halsey.
Yeah, when we get to Halsey, get to that study. But that's that, and it actually. It's actually a true representation of what would happen if you take out everything inside the building. Still, the building is just going to crumple. It's not going to fall down the same way it fell in reality.
In the exact manner of a classic controlled demolition,
right,
where we have total dismemberment of the structural steel system. This was a moment-resisting steel frame building. What does that mean, Kamal?
It means that the beams, which are the horizontal members, and the columns, which are the vertical members, are welded together so well that when the frame shifts, it offers resistance. It's not like you have these little little hinges where actually the thing would fail. It's just like the connection would have to twist and bend and resist any lateral movement. I don't know if that makes sense. But anyway.
Instead of that, it looks like all the connections failed. The columns and beams are severed one from another.
Yes. Uh-huh.
When you have a building that now falls naturally, like in this case due to earthquakes, columns and beams are not severed one from another. Yeah, there's damage. We can see the building though in the aftermath. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. So this is what we might have expected if the building were to fail. But no, we get this instead, a pile about 6 stories tall, fallen like a house of cards. And so are these fires going to be able to create that, set up the building for that level of damage? Unlikely. So we have to look for something that's more likely, and that is sounds of explosions heard by witnesses that are evidence of explosives. Like Daryl, a medical student, interviewed that evening.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was. It looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. We were in shock, and then the worst.
A sound of a clap of thunder, a shock wave ripping through the building, the windows busting out, and then the building coming down. NIST denies all of these witnesses, but here's Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic, describing his experience of this building coming down, or before it comes down.
You heard explosions, like boom, It's like a distinct sound. It's not like when in compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. That, to me, I knew that was an explosion. There was no doubt in my mind.
And what did Bill Rosati see?
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
A big flash, and then the building coming down. And here's Barry Jennings, who was with the housing department of New York, and he and Mayor Giuliani's attorney, Michael Hess, were called to an emergency meeting because plane had just hit the tower. And the other plane had hit the tower by the time they got there, before they got there. So the entire building had been evacuated, but they didn't know. And so here's our experience inside the building, having reached the 23rd floor, and they made a phone call and they said, get out of there. So here's the experience coming down.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions.
What sort of sound?
Like a boom. Like an explosion.
More than one?
Yes. We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor. When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
More information of bombs. Bombs heard like this from these first responders in the vicinity of Building 7 in the late morning of 9/11.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
You gotta get back from here. You know that. You gotta get back.
Sevens exploded. Interesting. NIST says, well, we've interviewed more than 100 first responders, and none of them heard explosions. And we're just hearing, we have all of these and many more witnesses of explosions. Yeah.
Could that be, okay, here's a question thinking, natural gas. Could that be a natural gas line getting ignited in the building?
We
that they're
have natural gas in these buildings for very good reasons. Just that reason, actually.
Okay. That's why I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Yeah. There's, I mean, did that, and this, that, yeah. So, Kamal, tell us why.
Well, hold on. I just want to give you, I remember on 9/11. It was my first week freshman year of high school of college. So I was about a week into college when all this happened. And I remember listening to the radio. I remember them talking about bombs and reporting bomb explosions, and they did it often. I also remember them reporting about a 5th plane that was taken down. So there's a lot of discrepancy between the mainstream narrative and what actually happened here. And I hope we're going to get to Mr. Silverstein and what he said.
Yeah, we have him too coming up.
Okay.
First, let's see why a localized failure in a steel frame building can't cause such a catastrophic collapse. Kamal?
That's precisely what we're talking about. Is you can have a partial collapse, like one little section of the floor falling, but to have a complete and catastrophic collapse is just not possible in this case. So,
well, this caught the attention of one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, Professor Leroy Halsey at the University of Alaska. He and his team did 4 years of study on this building, trying to find out why it came down, because there are so many similarly designed buildings in the world today. So they put 2 competing software platforms against each other, and they took out columns 79, 80, and 81. They found out, gosh, if that happened, the building would have tipped over. Surprise, surprise. And yet that's NIST's theory. But the building didn't tip over, obviously. So they went back to the drawing board and said, what do we have to do to get this building to collapse the way that the video in the middle did? Well, they had to take out all the core columns, floor by floor. And so on the right, you have the U.S. government model. Tell us about that, Kamal.
Well, yeah, I mean, so that's what we're talking about is the NIST study failed inside the building, pretty much everything. Just they took down that column 79, and as a result, you had all these other elements within the building falling apart, as you can see on the right. So what happens with that? The building actually, the outside skin of the building is still moment-resisting frames, and it's still like a skin of the building cannot fall by itself, cannot crumple, cannot just fall like a deck of cards. It would actually crumple, just like the picture shows. So their study actually debunked their own theory that the building would collapse that way. So that's a very helpful model to show that, what their theory is very unlikely.
So not only
Whereas
that,
on the left, you see the Professor Halsey's model, where he failed all the columns along 8 stories high in the building in order for it to collapse exactly at the same speed as the actual building.
Yeah, actual free fall acceleration, which you don't get from the U.S. government, and they stop it because it begins to tip over to the right, and so they won't even play it after 2 seconds into the global collapse because they don't want us to see that it's going to actually tip over. So what were the findings? Fire didn't cause the collapse of this building. The University of Alaska says the temperatures were not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel frame. Thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and the girders. The collapse of this building was a global failure involving what? The near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building, not a progressive collapse, as claimed by NIST. So we got to find out what in the world happened here. If it wasn't a collapse by fire, as NIST claims, is there anything that can tell us what might have really happened? Yeah, we can look at the evidence of extreme heat provided by who? FEMA. In their May of 2002 Building Performance Assessment Team report, there's a metallurgical examination included as Appendix C. What did they find? Never before observed eutectic reactions involving intergranular melting, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel. NIST did not give us this information. They took most of this information out. Even though in the Twin Towers, we also have razor thin sharpness that this 5/8" steel, the web of this beam thinned to due to what? Rapid oxidation and sulfidation. Liquid iron, that's molten iron. That's 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, where are we getting these temperatures? Jet fuel only burns less than half of those temperatures. Sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. This is all from the FEMA report, not from conspiracy theorists. It's perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation, says the New York Times. But NIST threw it out of their report. They suggest, well, maybe the sulfur came from gypsum board. Well, maybe not. Gypsum board has been used for 100 years to protect steel. It's never turned around and attacked the steel that it's been designed to protect for that long. So the author, Jonathan Barnett, says steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures. He's a fire protection engineer. He should know. But what he didn't realize is that it takes 4,000 degrees to evaporate steel. Where are those temperatures coming from? We know how hot this molten iron pouring out of the crab claw excavator is by its color. The physics of this tells us that it's exceeding 2,500 degrees. We know that only the worst fires imaginable are 1830 degrees, half of the temperatures required to evaporate steel. We know that jet fuel is only burning at 600 degrees Fahrenheit. And so it's not a factor. What can burn at those temperatures? Well, let's look at one possibility. Thermite.
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
Fascinating, because if thermite were used, it would explain the 4,000 degree temperatures. Nothing in the official narrative can. And so they deny that they ever even occurred. It would also explain the presence of sulfur, which is added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. And it would explain the presence of molten iron. Iron, we haven't used iron, elemental iron, Fe. We haven't used Fe iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years. So why is it in all the World Trade Center dust samples found by who? Again, not conspiracy theorists, but the U.S. Geological Survey, who did the most comprehensive study of the dust and produced it in 2005, their particle atlas. What do they find? Billions of previously molten iron microspheres. This is fascinating. They don't know where they came from. Neither does the EPA, who says it's a signature component of the World Trade Center dust. It's not even World Trade Center dust unless it has all these previously molten iron microspheres in them. Up to 6% of many of these samples are just that, previously molten iron microspheres amounting to up to 4 tons of this material. RJ Lee Group, an environmental consulting firm, does an independent analysis. They say they're formed during the event, not before, by the welders putting the building together, not afterward, by the iron workers cutting the building apart, but during the event. Well, where? How are they formed? Well, we could do an experiment, guys. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. If it doesn't agree with experiments, it's wrong, says the famous scientist. Did I forget his name? I did. But let's light some thermite. What look like thousands of sparks are actually molten iron spheres, which cool and fall into the pan. Why are they spherical? Well, that's what aerosolized liquids or liquids under pressure do due to surface tension. And so these liquid previously molten iron microspheres are found all throughout the World Trade Center dust. So that was all evidence of ignited thermite. Well, a team of 8 international scientists got together and said, is there any evidence of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Yeah, Niels Harrit put the team together. They were sent 7 independently collected samples. They looked at all of them and they found these curious red-gray chips. They thought they were paint. They look like paint, look like primer paint. But unlike primer paint, they are attracted to a magnet. They have a very high iron content. Well, this is interesting. They do analysis in the red layer, and they find through X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy aluminum, and iron, aluminum and iron, and manganese, which is added to thermite to become thermate. We're going, wow, this is the signature of thermite. What's that doing in all these red-gray chips? Well, they put them under a microscope 50,000 times, electron microscope, and they find nano-sized particles of iron oxide crystals and aluminum powder and platelets at the nanoscale, 1,000 times smaller than the diameter of a human hair. They're set in a matrix of oxygen, silica, and carbon. This is organic material. Organic material is what's used in TNT and high energy explosives to expand rapidly because they turn into gases. And those gases knock things over. That's how explosives work. Whereas incendiaries work by means of burning things up at extreme temperatures. They go, what have we found here? They do peer-reviewed literature. They search the literature. They find this is actually made. This is called super thermite. Lawrence Livermore Lab developed it before 2001. Explosive composites based on thermite reactions whose fuel and oxidizer constituents are intimately mixed on the nanometer scale. You see, they've engineered something to become an incendiary to become more explosive by reducing the size of these to the nanoscale. You increase the volume astronomically, and you've engineered you get an almost instantaneous chemical reaction. And
before you go on, what were both of you thinking when you started to realize all this information coming forward about super thermite and all the evidence being found?
Kamal, why don't you pick that one up? What were you thinking?
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that there's other factors at play here. It's not just structural collapse.
Yeah, I was shocked myself. And pleased that we had backup for this. Came out in 2009. This is a peer-reviewed study we're walking through.
Yeah.
And 2009, they produced their peer-reviewed study. Before this, we didn't have such solid, provable information of unignited nanothermite, which was developed again by Lawrence Livermore Lab, because when they put these in a differential scanning calorimeter, these red-gray chips, the lab itself showed that it was an active thermitic reaction. They produced a lot of energy. Paint doesn't do that. Paint doesn't have these exotic properties. It's an exothermic reaction, which is what these chips analyzed by the team of 8 scientists found also. They produce these incredible reactions. Well, what do you imagine happened,
Richard,
when they ignite? They produce what? Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found, produced, documented by R.J. Lee and the U.S. Geological Survey from the samples in their study. So we know exactly where these molten iron microspheres came from. As if we didn't know, they're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here. This is not made in a cave in Afghanistan. It's made only in the most advanced defense contracting laboratories. Go ahead. Trying to say something?
Yeah, before you get into this, I have 2 questions that are silly questions, but I just need them answered. These elements, right? Basic chemistry class. Is there anything in construction? This is the first part of the question. Anything in construction that would account for why this material would have been present naturally in the construction process versus secondary placed at the scene? Is there anything that you come up with?
This is actually the response that NIST gave. Well, there's aluminum cladding on the outside of the building, and there's rusted steel beams underneath that. So they must have somehow together combined into this perfect mixture of nanoparticles
right.
of aluminum and iron. I'm exaggerating a little bit.
No,
but this
I
is
get
the
what you're
letter.
saying. That's a wild connection that they would be making, especially in the
Yeah.
nanoparticle side. So that's the first part. The second part is this: we know, and I had family members that work down there as well, that many people have gotten cancers, they've gotten sick, many people have passed away from breathing in this dust. Is there anything about these elements that would be toxic to the human body that might explain why first responders, why people caught in that dust, running away from the buildings have all been suffering for the last 24 years? What would some of this nanothermite, super thermite be doing if breathed in? Has anyone in your research or then they peer reviewed talked about like the effects on the lungs, the effects to the human body?
Yes, Niels Harrit, PhD in nanotechnology, who developed this peer-reviewed paper that we're looking at, also found carbon nanotubes in the lungs of the first responders, which is not attributed to anything else in the mix. This was a scientific study. He didn't find them. He cited a study that found them, a peer-reviewed study, and that's different than that's different than asbestos, which was, of course, also found in addition to a toxic
Correct.
brew of other chemicals. But this is unique to this event, the carbon nanotubes found in the lungs of the first responders.
That's pretty telling to me that if that's being found in the biopsies of lungs, that was widespread through. And then my last part of this, and I'm sure you're going to cover this, how much of this needed to exist to account for this 6% finding that you just showed in this peer-reviewed paper? Is anyone, it's a nanoparticle, has anyone talked about like the mass that had to be in that region, downtown Lower Manhattan, in order to account for the amount of material that's there?
Well, we have up to 4 tons of ignited nanothermite in the form of these small iron microspheres, and up to 4 tons or so of the unignited red-gray chips. By extrapolation, you know how much dust there was roughly, and so that means there must have been dozens of tons of this material applied. We're going to talk about how it might have been applied also. But first, we look at the peer-reviewed paper, 25 pages. The red layer is active, unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology as highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material. That's in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal. It hasn't been contested by anyone putting forth their own peer-reviewed paper. People wave their hands, oh, that's just paint. No, again, paint does not have those exotic properties. So we have a total of 10 key characteristic features and some very uncharacteristic features of controlled demolition. Normally, they're not using incendiaries, but incendiaries have been used to bring down structures. But this is very expensive. And this is direct evidence of destruction with incendiaries in this case. And not one of these features can be accomplished by fires, let alone all of them, with additional circumstantial evidence and corroborative testimony. This is proof beyond a reasonable doubt of controlled demolition, a body of proof that's convinced 3,600 architects and engineers signed on to the petition at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, AE911truth.org, where we encourage people to learn more. That's a lot of architects and engineers, and many of them appear, including Kamal, in our documentary film series 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, which we've already produced 4 episodes featuring Kamal in episode number 3. So we encourage people to watch this series at 911c2c.org and form your own opinions. Take a look at the series here, just a couple of minutes.
no matter how improbable the conclusion may appear, when you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
We're bringing alive in the film the 60 exhibits of the 9/11 WTC evidence contained in the Lawyers Committee grand jury petition that have already been submitted to the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan to present to a special criminal jury.
This historic investigation is ongoing, and there's a role for you in it. Yes, you can help us bring the real perpetrators to justice.
Through this film series, we're bringing together 24 experts in their fields.
They ignored any scenario involving incendiaries.
Demolition work, you're going to set charges on each floor.
The building could not have been brought down by office fires.
In other words, all of the interior columns over 8 stories came down, were basically lost at once.
I could make out what looked like from a science fiction movie, molten lava, okay?
And he paused and said, that'll be coming down around 5 o'clock.
We'll be filming these evidence presentations, not only for our filings with the grand jury, also as presentations to each of you.
We're inviting you to serve as virtual grand jury during each episode.
So we have to get to the bottom of this question, and we have it for Building 7, but now we ask ourselves a key question. What about the Twin Towers? Well, we can look at them and see, are these controlled demolition? Looks a little bit different than the Building 7 destruction. We have here shown simultaneously, though they actually occurred 15 minutes apart, upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons each, laterally ejected at 85 miles an hour, clocked by physicists, landing up to 600 feet in every direction, trailed by what? Thick white smoke clouds. Why are these structural steel sections trailing thick white smoke clouds? Structural steel is not flammable in office fire conditions. What are these thick white smoke clouds? Well, let's burn some thermite and see. In addition to molten iron, we have thick white smoke clouds of what? Aluminum oxide ash, the other byproduct of thermite. So we have to ask ourselves then, does it have any of the features of controlled demolition? They're different, but let's look at them one by one. First of all, is there a sudden onset of destruction? Well, looking at the North Tower, it's at rest, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform downward motion, exactly like a controlled demolition. No jolt, no hesitation upon impact of the cold, hard steel below. Looks very much like Building 7, actually, in the first couple of seconds. Same with the South Tower. It's standing at rest, and all of a sudden, in uniform downward motion. We're told that the upper part drove the rest of the building down to the ground. Well, is it? I'll make it easier for you. Take a look at the lower red line, which is the point of plane impacts. There's no driving of anything below the point of plane impacts down to the ground. This upper part is telescoping in on itself. It's being destroyed in the first couple of seconds. If it were there, we'd see it, but none of the photos, none of the videos show an upper portion after 3 seconds driving the rest of the building down to the ground. If it were there, it would have driven these few remaining core columns standing 900 feet in the air for about 10 seconds until they are destroyed. And there's an explosion underneath them, which takes the foot out, and it descends through the smoke and concrete powder that's left behind. Let's compare it to a volcanic eruption. In fact, which one's the volcanic eruption? You can't tell, right? upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying solid molten objects, trailed by what? Thick white smoke clouds. This is the analogy that makes more sense than any kind of a collapse analogy. What would cause this? Well, we have to look for witnesses once again. NIST says they consulted more than 100 witnesses. They missed every one of these 156, which were on the webpage of the New York Times, orally recorded just after 1 month, before 1 month passed. And they produced 12,000 pages of testimony read by Professor Graham McQueen. And who found these quotes? We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway. And then it just came down. Again and again, you're going to hear this order of events. They're seeing something, they're feeling something, they're hearing something before the tower collapses. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. It shook my bones shortly before the first tower came down. I remember feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw flash at the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building, saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, and then it looked like the building came down. An explosion appeared at the very top. Simultaneously, from all 4 sides, materials shot out horizontally, and then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific does this fire chief, this expert witness, need to be? There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. I could read you 156 of these quotes. You can read them yourself at the New York Times website. But we're going to go on and see, is this a straight down symmetrical progression? Not into the building's footprint, but well outside the building's footprint. Let's look at the South Tower. It actually begins to fall over. So we have 22 degrees is falling off. Asymmetrical damage from the fires and the plane impacts. Asymmetrical damage on the building below from this part that's falling off. How in the world then do we get complete symmetrical destruction all the way around each face of the building, just like the firefighters described? It makes no sense. Let's look at the leading corner of these explosions. We can see in this looped video individual explosions, about a dozen of them. Obviously pre-placed explosives on the exterior, almost floor by floor. This is not a nuclear weapon going off, as has been hypothesized by some. It's not directed energy weapons taking out on some sort of incredibly synchronized fashion, weakening the steel floor by floor all the way down the building, synchronistically timed. No. So what do we have? Isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the controlled demolition industry, traveling or as far down below as 20 stories, 40 stories below the zone of destruction up above. There's no accounting for these in the official narrative whatsoever. Even 60 stories down below, we see these isolated explosive ejections, which are occurring here on the South Tower on the left side, a dozen of them simultaneously ejecting out of the tower, giving us proof of what happened to this structure. It's essentially being liquefied, if you will, turning into sand, such that it doesn't maintain its rigidity and rotate off of the part below, maintaining its angular momentum and falling off in one piece. No, the entire structure is being destroyed. And how fast? Well, again, almost free fall acceleration, clocked by physicists. 64% of the acceleration of gravity. That's 2/3 of free fall. That's accelerating straight down through what? Lots and lots of steel below. 287 massive columns, 47 core columns, 240 perimeter columns that we see here. There's more steel than glass on the perimeter of this building. Where did all that go so that the building could accelerate straight down through it? Well, what's happening to those exterior structural steel connections? They're landing and impaling themselves into skyscrapers all around the World Trade Center. They're destroyed 600 feet away, the Winter Gardens of the World Financial Center. They've destroyed the Deutsche Bank building. It had to be dismantled piece by piece. These sections are up to 8 tons, connected from one column to the other by 4 bolts. These are built up columns welded in a factory and bolted to the piece to the side of it through the spandrel panels, and bolted top and bottom with just 4 bolts. But they're freely flying now. They're structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons, freely flying. This is not like a banana peeling, especially this one. What's causing that? Back to, forward to, back to. It starts out horizontal. How does gravity work? Down. What's going on here? Out. A lot of out. Trailed by what? Thick white smoke clouds, which we now know is aluminum oxide ash, since steel columns are not flammable in office fire conditions. And there's enough energy here to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. And there's hundreds of them. It's a lot of energy distributed well outside the boundary of World Trade Center. Well, wait a minute. If that's true, and 100,000 tons of steel framing is distributed outside the tower's footprints, what's crushing the building? This is 1/3 of the weight of each of these buildings. Well, maybe it's the concrete. Let's look, because we're looking for 110 floors, each an acre in size. Concrete that's poured on metal decking supported by lightweight steel trusses. We're looking for about 110 of these floors, but we don't find 1 acre size floor. Not 50, not 20, not 1 acre size floor. Where did they all go? Well, in a real pancaking collapse, we're going to find pancakes, like this gravitational collapse due to earthquake in Mexico, like this 33-story building producing a pile that's about 6-7 stories tall, just from a 33-story building. Compare that to the 110-story building pile, which you see on the left here. Look at those guys on the right. That shows you how incredible a real pancaking collapse looks, but we don't see that at the base. Where's all the concrete? Oh, there it is. Pulverized in midair. What in the world is pulverizing this concrete? Could it be high energy explosives? And maybe could it be, according to the American Society of Testing Materials report C856, temperature exceeding 1500 degrees, which does what? Turns white concrete into white powdered, decomposed hydration products at that temperature. Wait a minute. We have 4,000 and 5,000 degree temperatures. What are those going to do to concrete? Fire Safety Journal says at 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit, we have concrete specimens completely decomposed. That's incredible. That could be where all the concrete is. And we find that it is distributed laterally, again, across lower Manhattan in a blanket 3 inches thick from river to river across lower Manhattan. Well, wait a minute. If that's true, and 90,000 tons of concrete from each building is pulverized and spread over 3 square miles, what's crushing the building? It wasn't the steel. The concrete is another third of the weight of the building. Together, that's 2/3 the weight of the building that's not available to crush it. And yet, Zdeněk Bazant from Northwestern University in Chicago used all of that weight in his calculation, which remains the key theoretical basis for NIST's column failure theory today. So we have shown fraudulence in the face on the part of Zdeněk Bazant, and this has been it took engineers 10 years to decode that.
Yeah, I'd like to just ask a question about that as far as how well that gets debunked by the thermite possibility and what you're saying. Okay, and again, I'm not a structural engineer. I don't have the credentials. Critical thinker, just trying to think outside the box here. Top of the building, where the plane enters, it severs, possibly destabilizes at least the top building to fall. I think that's a possibility, right? Like that to me makes sense as the average citizen. The weight from that top, I don't think it's just weight that I'd be thinking about. I'm curious, what is the pressurization per floor in an enclosed space as a collapse happens? So if you picture a balloon, if I push down from the top onto a balloon's going to expand outwardly. And so I would agree, like, yes, I've always thought that like the pulverization of concrete, the missing materials don't make sense. And I think this presentation is doing a great job of explaining that. But I'm curious, in the engineering side, in the studies, has there been anything that would show that these objects would be launched 500, 600 feet simply by a depressurization of weight from the top to launch outwardly? That's just something that if I'm thinking it, maybe somebody else that's watching it's thinking it as well. I'm curious if that's been addressed in any of this research or any of the 3,600 people that have been writing have brought this up.
Yeah, well, I have a response. Maybe you want to go first, Kamal?
Well, I guess let's look at what's interesting here is that the Bazant theory, Professor Bazant came up with his theory 2 or 3 days after the destruction of the towers. And to this day, it is that theory, a little modified later, that NIST hangs its hat on. So NIST says, essentially, this is the government agency that tasked with this brilliant research to determine how the towers came down. And they came out with this voluminous report, but all of it refers to saying progressive collapse or global collapse, which is the entire collapse, ensued. And they refer you to the Bazant paper. So there's really no explanation for how this thing happened without really referring to a paper that doesn't make any sense. So, but as far as your question, Greg, so you're saying that a block at the top is going to drop at the massive structure underneath and create outward momentum.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is there's a pressurization inside a building, right? Because it's enclosed. It's an enclosed space. Right. So as you would get something pushing down on it, that pressure's got to be pushed outwardly. And that's kind of where the question is. Has anyone looked at the pressure quotient, so to speak, in this study?
Well, that's a very, very good question. And it's so, I mean, the pressure from a block coming down, the way this thing came down is not going to create. I mean, I guess this could be calculated, but we haven't I haven't done it. But that pressure is not going to create this momentum that pulverizes the building into dust, and basically ejects these columns and beams outwards at this speed. It's not physically possible without really explosives.
Well, also that it's not even there. The top part has been destroyed, as we saw in the first 2 to 3 seconds. It's not there anymore, so it can't produce any pressure. It's in pieces. It's been destroyed. So you don't have it available to produce the pressure that you're imagining was produced. What's producing that pressure is explosives, and what we've shown, and incendiaries, and what we've shown is proof of those explosives and incendiaries. So we have to ask ourselves, is this proof of controlled demolition? Well, this is the 45-minute presentation, and we have a 5-hour presentation that goes into greater detail. Did you want to add something, Kamal?
No,
somebody did.
I saw that the presentation wasn't being shared anymore, and I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that if you brought it down, Richard.
I brought it down because it was acting up. Now I'm going to share again, if you don't mind.
Yep, I'll bring it back up.
Adding that would be fantastic. We'll go ahead and
when you're going through all of this, what pops up in my head is who has the resources to do something like this. And maybe
let's get to that question after we complete the evidence.
We'll get to that. I also want to just, for all the people that are leaving comments from all over the world, aloha back to Hawaii. We see all the comments. We're purposely not bringing them up right now, as well as Chris and I are kind of staying quiet because this is a great presentation, but we will be bringing some of your comments up at the end of the show when we're asking some of those questions that Chris just brought up. So feel free, continue to leave comments. We are reading them, and we will bring them to both Richard and Kamal before the end of the show. So thank you everybody for commenting. Go ahead, Richard.
And we're pretty much there. We have another documentary that's been produced. It's our landmark documentary, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Produced 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, with 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out this evidence. We have the 15-minute documentary just on Building 7, narrated by actor Ed Asner, professionally produced for PBS. We have the story in an hour of this documentary by Dylan Avery, creator of Loose Change 9/11. And produced by Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth again. All of that bringing to you much a rounded sampling of the evidence that we have, including the brochure that outlines all of this evidence. You can download it for free off the website and print it and give it to architects, every architect and engineer that you can find, everybody else that you know. I mean, we've got to get to the truth about 9/11. We have a $6.5 trillion global war that your great-grandchildren will not even be able to continue paying for. We have the loss of our reputation as a country through the torture of citizens still ongoing in Guantanamo Bay with no justice, even after 24 years. We have the largest building in Utah receiving your emails, your texts, your phone calls for use against you later. We have the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, all which are used against you. Again, any of us can be arrested without a right to a lawyer, a trial, a jury. We can be tortured and even assassinated. All this because of 9/11. So where are you going to draw your line in the sand? Or are you just going to keep your head in it so that you don't have to speak out? Now, we're asking you to join Greg and Chris and others who are courageously speaking out on this subject. And so we encourage you to join us and spread this, share this podcast with everybody. But don't just sit on this information. This is time for you to act. Kamal and I didn't come here to speak to just you. We came here to speak to everybody you know, because we're going to lose our country if we do nothing, and we're going to deserve it. Thank you.
No, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Kamal.
Great stuff.
Yeah. We got to actually have you doing promos for us there, Richard, because that's everything we would have said about sharing the show out. That was excellent. All right. I started my segment tonight for those that tuned in after the fact, just saying that I think that we owe it to the deceased to ask questions. I think that it is a moral duty to not just accept because we were told something is the way it was, to just sit with that, because there's been plenty of times through our country's history where we were told to accept something, but then new facts come out later on and we find, oh, why didn't anyone listen back then? Well, truth of the matter is there are patriotic people right now doing great work, just like Richard and Kamal, that have come on to the Chris Michaels show tonight to tell you all about this. And oftentimes people put it like, oh, well, that's fringe and that's this. I didn't hear anything, and my alarm was going today. I was ready to be like, hey, there's something fringy. I didn't hear fringe science. I heard everything peer reviewed. I heard everything that make logical sense. In fact, I watched Patrick Bet-David just last week. He had Dr. Judy Wood on, where she gave this assertion that it was a direct energy weapon, and I said that doesn't make sense to me. This concept, and he even kind of seemed a little bit confused. And I was glad to hear in your presentation you actually showed the evidence a direct energy weapon couldn't go floor by floor in the manner of which people are stating that to be the case. So my first question for you would be, what has been the barrier in getting people to listen to both of you about the knowledge and the studies that you've accumulated over this time? What are some barriers, and are they getting easier as we move 24 years out from the attack? Is time actually helping, or is time hurting?
Well, it's actually helping now. We've got Senator Ron Johnson's attention, who has come and spoken to the Turning the Tide conference September 9, 10, and 11, 10, 11, and 12 in Washington, D.C. He spoke. He risked his reputation to speak at a 9/11 Truth Conference, and he promised a real investigation. And he's the chair of the Permanent Senate Subcommittee on Investigations with subpoena power. So we're meeting with him, and I've personally given him 90 minutes of this presentation, more than we saw tonight. And he was very impressed. And so we're working together with him now to produce a comprehensive document. This is unprecedented. I mean, the entire 3-day conference was also live streamed on Redacted, Clayton Morris's Redacted station platform. So that was unprecedented. He live streamed the entire 3-day event. Lots of evidence came out. We have 3,600 architects and engineers now risking their reputation at Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth and demanding a new investigation. This is all adding up, along with Kurt Weldon, former congressman, and former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, recent appearances on Tucker, on Jimmy Dore, on Clayton Morris. This is waking people up, and not to mention the 5-part documentary by Tucker Carlson that you can see now, the first 2 parts at ae911truth.org. It's making the conversation okay. And it's incredible. You can talk about it in polite society now. You couldn't before. Kamal, you probably have something to add to that.
Well, just it's somewhat of a mixed bag. Of course, the good news is that alternative media is picking this up more so than ever before, and maybe that's thanks to the demise of the mainstream media. Nobody's watching it anymore. I mean, to some extent. But the worry is that we have a limited amount of time here, because it seems that there's efforts to actually take over the social media, and as you probably already know, that we have a window that's somewhat closing, so that's kind of worrisome. So it's a race between the powers of truth and the powers who are basically trying to suppress the truth, and hopefully the truth will prevail.
Yeah.
Well, I think you folks are on the right track, of course. And I hope that we get as much truth about 9/11 out there. I mean, I remember it. And now you've got a whole group of younger Americans that were born after the event and not knowing what society was like prior to the Patriot Act and all of the NDAAs. And they think this kind of thing in the airports are completely normal. And I don't. I'm not for any of it at all. And I think we need to continue to have these kinds of conversations and also continue to bring more information to light. When I see all of this, I mean, it just pretty much validates everything that I've thought happened. I don't buy the directed energy weapon concept. I don't buy the nuke concept either. But I would like your opinion on why there were witness accounts of molten steel flowing underneath the World Trade Center.
Well, we showed molten steel pouring out of the crab claw excavator bucket. We didn't have time to show you all the accounts, numerous accounts of molten steel. Why were they flowing? Because thermite was used. What is the byproduct of thermite? Molten iron. So it's actually molten iron that the first responders are seeing flowing down the channel rails like lava from a volcano, they say. Mm-hmm. So that's what that is.
It just, the descriptions were massive amounts of this. So I can only imagine the efforts that have gone into creating an event such as this. I mean, how long do you think it would have taken to set all of these charges and to place all this? I mean, we're not talking about bathtub thermite either. We're talking about high-grade military thermite. And where would they get this all from?
Well, I don't know where they get it from, but one possible way of bringing it into the building is through the elevator modernization, which was going on the 9 months prior to 9/11. The largest elevator modernization in the world. Ace Elevator had the contract. They came out of nowhere to get it. They beat Otis Elevator, who had installed and had been maintaining these elevators up to the time of the collapse. That would have given them immediate access through the hoistways to the core columns and beams in the building. But that would have created a lot of dust, if you understand that these hoistways are made out of 2-inch thick gypsum board, and you have to saw through that to access on every level or so access to the core columns. And that's exactly what Scott Forbes, the senior database administrator of Fiduciary Trust, described. That dust came through the ventilators and just it was on everything. It was like he said they didn't even do their job. They made it worse. They were complaining about all this dust. Well, that's interesting. How could thermite have been applied to the floors, the concrete floors? Well, turns out they had fireproofing upgrades months and years before 9/11. And it turns out that many of those floors were coincident with the point of plane impacts in each tower. The South Tower lower than the North Tower. So we certainly want an investigation of those fireproofing upgrades, which may not have been fireproofing at all, but liquid applied nanothermite. Maybe they were told it was liquid applied intumescent paint. Who knows? But it certainly gave them access to apply this material, which creates, again, 4,000 and 5,000 degree temperatures, which we learned can decompose concrete completely.
Right. I can't help but, ask the question of, okay, gather my thoughts here, because I have a kind of a place I want to take this. I'm not sure if you ever watched Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11.
Yeah.
To me, I actually, I know people, it's political, and you feel, I thought it was excellent the way that he really helped people start the question who could have been responsible. Why might they have been responsible? Why would the American government, literally take Osama bin Laden's family and give them chartered flights out of the country, the safety in the midst of all of this? There's just a lot of things that when you start to look at what our government was doing, doesn't make a lot of sense. You look at the political gain that came out of it. You brought up, and I'm so glad that you did, the Patriot Act just happened to be in the wings, which helped corrode our rights. It made people say in this country, oh, I got nothing to worry about. The government can survey me. They can, which is absolutely false. Nobody should be eroding their privacy. And look where we are now. We have AI tracking everything that we're doing. We have no expectation of privacy. There's cameras everywhere. People put them on their front doors and the police have access to them. The Patriot Act and September 11th paved the way for all of this. People like Dick Cheney and Halliburton getting his pipeline from Afghanistan, running it all the way over through the Middle East. There's just a lot to take in if you start going down the rabbit hole, so to speak. So to connect Michael Moore's work and to ask, okay, well, maybe we're not getting the full story about who actually was responsible, and your work of realizing, okay, there's nanothermite, peer-reviewed studies. Obviously, this had to get there somewhere. If you were asked to pull a building like World Trade Center 7, my question as an architect, as a structural engineer, Kamal, how long would it take for somebody to wire up an explosive into the columns, into the floors, not just for World Trade Center 7, but for Building 1, Building 2, if that's what we're looking at? How long do you imagine that a process like this could have taken? And then who would have carried it out that we would not be able to get anyone to talk 24 years later? That's kind of, I had to frame that around there, but that's what I'd like you guys to both respond to.
Well, I mean, let me just say that this is not my expertise. Planting explosives and controlled demolition is not my bailiwick. And also, we have a lot of ideas and speculations about who's responsible for that, but this is really not our job as architects and engineers to really speculate. Our job has been really to point out what's available in terms of evidence. And I think Richard does that beautifully. But I think beyond that, we need to leave it to the authorities, the real authorities, to investigate this thing, determine who's the criminal here. I wish I could.
The problem with that, though, is we can't leave it to the authorities, because what we're establishing here is World Trade Center 7 likely, and somebody in the comments earlier had read my mind as you guys were talking. They talked about the insurance companies. We kind of alluded to that. But when you think about insurance companies and, they get the doctor to look at you and you're supposed to be truthful and everything, but you want to be careful you don't over talk because you could lose your insurance coverage. Certainly, it sounds like somebody didn't want too many details coming out about World Trade Center 7 and some of these other buildings. I think it was rumored that even an insurance policy went out against some of these buildings shortly before the terrorist attacks. And so when you look at the evidence, the fact that we don't have answers, I'm sorry, but I don't trust that we're going to get answers from any government account. I think you gentlemen are doing phenomenal work as far as connecting the dots, freefall, Thermite. And I know, Richard, you've been at this for a long time, aware of who you are. And I thank you for that tireless work, that you've been doing. But that's all the more reason why I'm asking that question. Is there forensic evidence that can be seen with nanothermite? Is there anybody that's actually starting to look into who has access to that in labs across this country that could have had contracts in these buildings? Because it's going to come down to people like myself, Chris Michaels, and the internet journalists that are out there, as I just do not trust that we're going to get any type of movement from authorities to answer questions like this.
Well, we've got movement. We've got Senator Johnson, who's promised hearings, and we hope that he'll use subpoena power also. We're in negotiation with them right now to produce a comprehensive report of all the evidence produced by the entire 9/11, well, by the most trusted components of the 9/11 truth movement. So can we trust that? He did a pretty good job with COVID, exposing it to the world, the false disease and the false solution to that disease, which is neither safe nor effective. And so we're not leaving it to the authorities. We're reaching out to the public right now. Kamal and I do lots and lots of interviews. I've done over 1,000 interviews, and I won't stop until the public is educated and demanding a new investigation. And yeah, it's taken 20 years. Yeah, it's disheartening how long of a process this is. But we're finally making visible, tangible progress in alt media. For instance, Clayton Morris, Jimmy Dore, Tucker Carlson. And I've been on Clayton Morris and I've been on Jimmy Dore, and we expect to be on Carlson and Rogan also. So as we get there and make these larger platforms, we'll be getting not just millions and millions, but tens of millions, hopefully hundreds of millions around the world very soon.
I think it's really important how you're framing all of this too, because Greg kind of asked the question, who did this and where can we point the finger? But that's beyond the scope of your research. Your research is saying, look, this is what our background, this is our experience, this is our expertise, and here's what we think based upon what we're seeing here and what we've gathered. I think that's extremely important, because I think a lot of the times you have these people that truly have their hearts in the right place trying to figure out what exactly is going on with 9/11 and many other, dare I say, conspiracies. You referenced COVID. I'm going to throw that into that column. And they go all over the place and they speculate, and a lot of the times it's emotional, and it's not really backed up by any of the science. And you folks are doing exactly that. So I think it is a pivotal moment for you right now to really get out there. I think we, like you said, we have a small window to try and get the truth out as often as we can, because it's closing rapidly, because you're going to start to have people that simply die off because it's 25 years ago. And like I said before, the younger generations, they don't experience it. They don't know what it was like on that day, nor do they know what life was like before that day. So we need to get as much visibility to these things as possible in the shortest amount of time. And I think you folks are doing great work on it. And I wish you the best of luck, too.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
We probably will need it, as Kamal suggests. It is a tough road to hoe. It's been a long journey, and we're just actually gearing down for the long haul, realizing that this could take more than 24, 25 years.
You know, I just want to give a plea to the listeners and the people watching. Thousands of people are already watching tonight. We see the numbers up here. Great. Continue sharing it with friends this evening, tomorrow, next month, whenever you're finding this and engaging. But I do respect the fact that both you gentlemen have stuck to, this is my expertise. I'm not here to say who, why, how. I'm here to show what the evidence shows. I think that's the correct thing to do. And there's a lot of people nowadays that want to always answer the rest of the questions. But the point of what I was making, I think, is going to be the internet sleuthing that needs to happen from somebody who watches this. Now that you've seen the evidence, you've seen that there's this super thermite, nanoparticles. There's got to be somebody who's going to watch this show and say, oh, my lab works on that. Oh, we know somebody who's used that in this type of application. And then it's up to you, if you have information about that, to start connecting the dots and bringing that information to others and sharing in the way that we can use X as a platform and other social media. I really do believe that this is a starting point to get people better educated. And Richard, your presentation's phenomenal. Bringing that presentation to now say, hey, who has this material? How could they have possibly have done it? You're right. That's an unfair question for me to ask of both of you. But the reason I'm asking that in general tonight is because somebody must be listening that can connect that piece of the puzzle. Somebody that's in chemistry knows how that's made. Somebody has that knowledge, and that's the next missing piece that will lead to the next missing piece. So that is the call to action, so to speak, tonight for everybody, if you're wanting to help out in all of this. Also, up on the screen right now is a QR code. That's 9/11 crime scene to court that Richard Gage talked about earlier. You can scan that with your cell phone if you're watching right now on a computer, or later on you can come back to it. If you scan that, it will take you right to 911c2c.org, which is the video and page that Richard was showing us a little bit earlier. Chris?
All right, gentlemen, where can people find you if they want to learn more? Can they reach out to you on any social media, any email addresses?
Yes, the best place is the website of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which is easy, AE911truth.org. That's where the 3,600 architects and engineers have landed, demanding a new investigation on the petition. That's where you can find Kamal and his team of engineers and architects, and also Richard Gage 911.org. That's where you can find also lots of the evidence.
Richard, Kamal, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Greg, what do you think?
It's been a phenomenal show.
I think so.
Just wanted to say thank you to all the listeners and people that are bringing in. We got lots of comments coming through. Just give a shout out, 9/11 Truth Hawaii. Thanks so much. David Murdy, thanks so much. We'll be sharing everything with everyone as well that we've been speaking with. Chip, New York City World Trade Center account. Thank you so much. He wants to give a greetings to Richard. Thank you for what you're doing. So a little support there as well. And just lots of engagement tonight. But the best way that you can honor this show is right now. Hit the share button, hit the like button, wherever you're finding this. Don't let this message die after the hour and 45 minutes of excellence that Richard and Kamal gave us. Please share this to a family member, a loved one, a friend, and make sure that they know this did not deal in any way, shape, or form tonight with conspiracies. This dealt with hard scientific evidence and observation, which is what science is. And we need more of this in all conversations, not just when we're talking about what happened on 9/11, but when we're talking about everything in our world. And so that's going to land there, Chris. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on the show tonight, Chris, and being with these two gentlemen. It was a pleasure.
Oh, no, it was great to see you back, Greg. It was wonderful. Richard, Kamal, let's hope to check back in with you folks, maybe sometime in the new year. Let us know what happens, especially if you start to get more hearings and all of that, because we'd love an update as you gain more traction.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Chris.
Awesome.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
All right.
It's been the Chris Michaels Show.